My name is Leonard, and I am a professor of microbiology at one of the prestige universities in Canada. Even though I am very young, I've pulled through in a dramatic way in my area of specialization. I happened to finish high school at a very tender age, and when I finally graduated from college, I was barely 23. Without further hesitation, I put in for my master's, and within a few months, precisely 24, I was done. I proceeded with my doctorate degree and completed it within a short while too. I soon applied to lecture at one of the prestigious colleges we had in Canada, and I was immediately absorbed. I became a reading professor just a year after I was employed, and then 2 years later, I became a professor, still young and full of life and energy. I did my work with excellence and zest. I also made sure I enjoyed the good things in life. I was paid handsomely, so I could afford a lot of luxury. I had a sports car I used for driving around to clubs, parties, lounges, and bars. I had a couple of girlfriends I hung out with, and I finally settled down with one of them. It is what eventually transpired in the course of our 4-year marriage that I want to share with you. I got married to one of my girlfriends named Rasa. She happened to be the last lady I dated after playing around with so many of them, some of whom broke my heart by heavily cheating on me in the process. Rasa came into my life at a moment when I got fed up with ladies and concluded none of them could be trusted. After staying single for close to 6 months, I decided it was wise for me to get married and stop playing around in order to save myself all the heartbreak and disappointment. Moreover, I had become so extravagant while I fooled around with these girls, not saving up anything reasonable commensurate with my take. Home pay at the end of the month. My life became disjointed, scattered here and there. In a quest to have some order back, I decided to tie the knot with Rasa. We lived happily ever after. One day, I had just returned from the university with high expectations for our outing that evening. We had planned to go to the movies. I was so glad when, upon arrival, I found Rasa already getting set for the outing. Her face exudes such excitement, happiness, and beauty, and I could not help but hurry up to change into my jeans, t-shirt, and trainers in order to join her in the frenzy. She was also wearing blue cowboy jeans with white sleeveless blouses on them. We both had our dark shades on and gently worked out of the house to get into the car. While we were about to get in and drive down to the cinema, Rasa took some selfies and urged me to join her for the show. We ended up spending a couple of minutes taking selfies and photos with our phones as though that was our first date. We really felt excited about each other that day, like never before. We had a good time in the cinema, and we both shared our experiences as we returned home. We were so excited and happy with ourselves that we decided to have dinner outside the house. Soon enough, we set up the dining table outside, but within our perimeter fencing. We smiled at each other while we ate, and I, for one, was already turned on and ready to do what I know how to do best. Do you understand what I am saying? When we were done eating, we talked for a few minutes, and I pulled Rasa close to myself and got her in the mood. She kind of struggled to get in, but all the same, we made out with each other. While we were on it, I noticed she was somewhat far from me. We were physically together, but emotionally miles apart. Rasa was completely distracted, as though she was imagining something else she couldn't just talk about or explain to me. I wondered why she acted that way after spending such a great time with her that evening at the movies. I began to get pissed, but I controlled myself. I decided to jack her by her shoulders a bit, and she blinked back to the reality of the moment. It was as though she just returned from a mind trip she'd been having. All the while, I went up and down in motion, thinking we were mutually deriving pleasure and satisfaction from each other. She stared at me with a disapproving gesture as if to say, "Let me alone to go and sleep." When I noticed that, I decided to ask her if she was not in the mood and why she was not in the mood. But before I could get to asking her, she had already fallen asleep. I was both surprised and disappointed by the attitude she displayed that night. Nonetheless, I let her sleep while I lay awake for hours, thinking about the entire development. I wondered where all that was coming from. All kinds of thoughts and speculations went through my mind that night. I felt a bit betrayed that after showering her with such emotional attention and care, she decided to act in such a withdrawn and lackadaisical manner. I could only hope someone else had not stolen her heart. I kept thinking in this fashion until the morning hours, when I eventually fell asleep. I felt bad when I woke up with the same thoughts in the morning. I called Rasa into the living room to ask her why she decided to act that way the previous night. She made the excuse of being extremely tired, but I asked to know what she had been doing when she claimed to be so tired like that, and she could not give me any tangible answer. At the end of the day, she could only apologize for the disparaging treatment, and I decided to put it behind me. I got ready for work and kissed her goodbye as I left for the lecture theater. 2 days later, I had discussed with a very good friend of mine our experience at the movies with my wife, and he asked me to take him to watch that same movie. So we decided to go watch it after work. I did not inform Rasa about it, since it was something I hoped to quickly do and get back home at almost the usual time I used to return. More so, I thought if I went ahead and told her, she would complain that I was too extravagant. Immediately after closing work, I and my friend drove down to the cinema and watched the movie with rapt attention. I explained some scenes to my friend while we watched. Soon enough, it was time for a break, and the lights came on. I decided to use that window to visit the restroom before the movie resumed. While I returned from the washroom and got into the theater, I was shocked to notice Rasa sitting 2 rows behind us with a guy. At first, I thought I wasn't seeing correctly, so I cleaned up my eyes with my fingers in order to see more clearly. I looked more closely and discovered she was the one. But this time around, I also saw something even more provocative. The guy in question held her hands and placed both on her right thigh. I tried not to think of the worst case, even though my heart burned violently like an inferno. She hadn't seen me yet, because I was just standing at the entrance of the theater, where I had a better view of the audience from behind. I stood there really confused, wondering if I were to go and say hi to her, since both of us are watching the same movie. I hoped she wouldn't have the guts to complain anymore. I set my foot to move, and immediately, I noticed that the guy had put his hand behind Rasa and held her tightly by her waist. I was starstruck and immobilized immediately. I stood frozen at the entrance of the theater, even when the movie resumed after the break interval. The lights had gone off, and my friend wondered why I took so long to return. I was totally numbed and incapacitated as I quietly returned to my seat. My friend asked me why I took so long, and I told him I was trying to observe something that was playing out within the hall. He had no idea what I was talking about, so he continued to enjoy the movie. A few minutes later, I turned to see what Rasa and her friend were doing. I was dazed to see that they had all moved to the back of the theater to have some subtle fun while the movie played. I wanted to aggressively confront them, but I thought of the consequences, and I quickly changed my mind. I was not ready to create a scene and distort the serene atmosphere of the theater. I managed to keep my cool while I boiled like wildfire within. I waited till the movie ended and asked my friend to disguise himself while we waited a little for them to go out before we did. We gradually watched as they walked to the parking lot to get into the car. I was getting hot and uneasy within me, and sweat came out of my body profusely. They soon left the parking lot, and we immediately trailed them from behind. I was wondering where they intended to drive next. After trailing them for a while, I noticed he was heading in the direction of my house. I and my friend parted ways, and I drove into our street. I noticed my wife's alleged lover had dropped her already and had turned to go away. I ignored him and raced to the house. I immediately parked the car and stepped into the house. Cunningly, I asked Rasa how her day had been, and she surprisingly answered that she had a busy day and wouldn't want to eat but go to bed. I asked her what she did during the day, whether she went somewhere for work purposes, and she claimed she had been indoors all day, doing some home chores. Quickly, she climbed onto the bed and begged me to allow her to catch some sleep. I immediately got furious and felt like slapping the truth out of her, but she asked me to go around the house to see all she'd been doing during the day. True to her words, I noticed she had accomplished no small feat that day. She had cleaned up the entire house and the compound. I had to control myself. But then I wondered if she was not the one I saw at the movie, with a guy almost an hour ago. It felt so ridiculous to think I couldn't recognize my wife anymore, or that I kind of confused her for someone else. But I was damn sure I saw her. In order to stop the argument, I decided to hire a private investigator to help me track her movements and get me evidence. I gave her some excuses and left the house. I met a very renowned private investigator and shared with him my encounters. He asked me to calm down and wait for his findings. After paying the stipulated fine, I left his office, and 4 days later, he called me and handed me all the photographs and messages he recorded during his investigation. I was glad to find out that I was right about who I saw in the movie that night. From the findings of the private investigator, it turned out that Rasa and that same guy I saw in the movie had been making out with each other at a designated hotel in town. They met at least 3 times a week, and it was during the morning hours when I was actively engaged in the university, lecturing my students. I wondered what wrong I'd done to deserve all that shit, but I decided to keep quiet about my findings and just watch as my wife went on with her life. I could only watch her in disgust and anger and wait for the right idea to hit my mind about how I was going to nail her. The following week, we had to attend one of her friends' weddings in another town. So we decided to board a train to travel down for the wedding. While en route, I kept thinking of the best way to vent my revenge. I had wanted to serve her in the same dish she had been using to serve me all the while she flirted around with that guy, coupled with the way she denied ever having anything to do with any other guy. I couldn't just set my eyes on her without getting upset and angry. I had to just control myself throughout the journey. And soon enough, we got to the wedding venue. While we were returning, using the same train, I came up with a plan. I remembered how she was looking and the excitement on her face while she was in the cinema, and thought there must be something to it. Perhaps there was a way she turned up that I needed to explore. Quickly, I initiated touching her in some ways, and she was reluctant for a while. But surprisingly, she got in the mood not too long after I started, and she had fun with me in a way she had never expressed for a long time. I was surprised to see her buy into the idea of making out on the train. That was when it hit me that she'd been cheating on me, just because I never explored those positions and styles. And she wanted to try them out with some other guy. I got even more offended and wondered why she kept mute all the while and refused to communicate her needs. What does it cost her to clearly inform me that she was tired of the way and manner in which we made out? Was she ashamed of putting it straight to me? Or did she just decide to be mischievous and flirt around? I kept thinking about that for a while. I could imagine that this whole development was a play out of a prolonged plan and decision to carry out her wild fantasies, and that was definitely not the case with me. She just decided she was going to taste honey from another honeycomb. I mean, no one can convince me that she wanted it with me, and I denied her the privilege. She never wanted it with me, and I felt seriously betrayed by that. All these thoughts ran through my mind after we were done. We eventually got home, and I tried out my plan once more, and she was all out for it. I had an early morning lecture to deliver to a group of final year students. And once I got out of bed, I left the divorce documents on a stand that was just beside the bed, so it would be the first thing she saw when she woke up. When she woke up from sleep, she was greeted by the divorce documents. She thought I was just trying to play some pranks on her. But when she noticed I never returned home throughout the day, she became worried and reality dawned on her. She began to bombard my phone with her calls, but I refused to answer. I finally picked up the phone and told her everything I knew. I burst her bubbles by letting her know I saw them at the cinema when they held hands and finally retired to the back to have fun. She started giving me all sorts of excuses, claiming she was bored staying at home all alone, and that this guy had been her old friend who had just come to town. They decided to hook up at the cinema that evening. She kept on bringing up different reasons to shut me up, but I wasn't buying into all her lies. When she saw that I was not ready to take in her bullshit, she stopped and resorted to begging. She explained that she had only wanted to try something different and never meant to hurt him. She claimed she still loved me with the whole of her heart and couldn't imagine losing me. After listening to enough of her talk, I cut off the call in anger and switched off my phone. I had to remain in the office and hang out with some colleagues of mine while all that played out. I never wanted to interact with her anymore. She had to go face her life and perhaps get married to her lover. Something within me tells me they may probably be planning to marry each other, but that will be after they succeed in killing me and taking away my investments. I never told her this, though. I only assured her that she now has the freedom to get married to the man she had always dreamed of, and who will give her everything she wants in bed. 4 years later, I had published a lot of research papers and traveled to different countries for my research work. I decided to remarry. I met my new wife on campus. She happened to also be a professor in the same department as me, teaching bioinformatics. We have been married for a year now, and she is pregnant. Perhaps this winter, we'll welcome our new baby. I got to know that Rasa finally married her lover, just like I had predicted. But he cheated on her with a woman he met at his workplace while she was pregnant, and eventually they had a big fight and got divorced. Rasa became single and eventually gave birth to a baby girl. She regretted ever cheating on me and always wished we got back together. But I told her it was a wild goose chase.